Well, hello and welcome back to Greg's Game Room. Now, as you probably know, the Mega Drive Mini 2 has been announced in Japan, and it just got me wondering, what games could they put on a Sega Genesis Mini 2 if they were to bring it to America? So I've compiled about 40-something odd games that I would really love to see on a new version of the Sega Genesis. I'm not really concerned with what licensing it would take to get any of these games. This is just my wish list. Starting with The Adventures of Batman and Robin. This is a graphical masterpiece of a game, but it's really difficult. Next is Afterburner 2, a very popular arcade game that I'm kind of surprised didn't appear on the original Sega Genesis Mini. Next is Aladdin, probably the most popular Sega Genesis game ever created. I think it sold more copies than any other game.
Yeah.
Next we have Alien Storm, which is kind of a Golden Axe style beat 'em up, I suppose. In a way, I think this game's kind of been forgotten, but it's a lot of fun. Next is Chuck Rock. I always think of the Sega Genesis when I think of this game. It's kind of an early game from Virgin Interactive, and it fulfills the need for a Sega Genesis Mini 2 to have some platformers. Next is Decap Attack, and again a very popular game for the Sega Genesis. Kind of an odd horror type game though. You'll see that that's a theme with some of these other games on my list here. Next is Desert Strike, which is a helicopter game from Electronic Arts. It was a very popular game. Oops. Next is Dragon's Fury, and I believe this is a port of Devil's Crush from the TurboGrafx 16. Next is Dynamite Duke, kind of a fun shooter game, and again, one of those games that I think of when I think of the Sega Genesis. gotta learn how to avoid these bullets. Ugh. Next is Earthworm Jim 2. Of course, the first Earthworm Jim was on the original Sega Genesis Mini, and it was an extremely popular game. I love how wacky this game is. It kind of defies genre. Next is Echo 2, The Tides of Time. Again, the original Echo the Dolphin was on the Sega Genesis Mini, so it just makes sense to have the sequel on the second Mini. Next we have Eternal Champions CD. Now I know that some of the CD games will be appearing on the Mega Drive Mini 2, so I thought, why not? I'm going to add a couple of CD games here. The original Sega Genesis Mini had Eternal Champions, but it's not as good as the CD version. Next is going to be Final Fight for the Sega CD. Now this is a really great version of this game. You can play as any of the three characters, and I believe if I had a friend we could be playing two players at once. The only thing about this game is that it seems to lack a little bit of color, but hey, you know what? I'll trade that out for some really amazing music. Next is one of the incredible shooters for the Genesis, Gaiaris. This was a game that I actually owned back in the day. That kid really got me to buy the game. Next is Gauntlet 4, which is a really great representation of the original arcade game. In this case, I'm playing the story mode. Next is Golden Axe 2. Again, the original Golden Axe was on the first Sega Genesis Mini, so it just makes sense to have the sequel here. It's debatable as to which game is actually better, but, you know, they're both fun games. Next we have Lightning Force, or Thunder Force 4. I was kind of surprised that this didn't appear on the original Sega Genesis Mini, so I thought, heck, we gotta have it on the new one. Probably one of the greatest shooters of all time for the Sega Genesis. Heck, maybe one of the greatest shooters of all time, period. Next we have Mercs. This is a personal favorite of mine. I just love this game. I especially like running around with a flamethrower, just, you know, firing everybody up. The only downside to this version of the game is that it's only single player, but still, it's a heck of a lot of fun. Next is Mickey Mouse's Timeless Adventures. The original Sega Genesis Mini had a couple of Mickey Mouse games, so I thought we should continue the tradition and put a few more Disney games on here. Next is Midnight Resistance, kind of a forgotten shooting game, but just give it a chance, it's pretty fun. The next game is The Misadventures of Flink, which I believe is a beautiful, beautiful platform game. Look at the detail in these graphics here. A couple of Lost Vikings there, I suppose. Next is Mortal Kombat 2. I mean, you guys know what this game is. It kind of appeared on the original Sega Genesis Mini as a hidden game. You couldn't access it unless you hacked it, though.
Outstanding. Finish him.
One of my favorite fighting games, if not my all-time favorite fighting game. Next is Miss Pac-Man. This is a really beautiful version from Tengen, however you want to pronounce it. You can do multiple mazes, you can do the arcade set of mazes, you can turn on the speed booster, you can make the game easier, harder, however you want to do it. Next is Musha, again one of the seminal shooting games for the Sega Genesis. Next is NBA Jam Tournament Edition. Even if you don't like sports games or basketball, this is just a really, really fun game.
Sweet touch. Head fake. For two. Sweet touch.
I'm not really that good at the Sega Genesis version of this game, but still, I love it. It's a lot of fun.
Rejected.
Next is Outrun, which, again, to me was kind of a head-scratcher that it did not appear on the original Sega Genesis Mini. I understand this is appearing on the new Mega Drive Mini 2, so if they do a Sega Genesis Mini 2, hopefully it will appear as well. Next is Quackshot, starring Donald Duck. You know, Mickey Mouse has a lot of games on here, but, you know, not too many for Donald, so I thought, well, let's go ahead and include Donald's best game on here. I love it when he goes crazy. Next is Road Rash 3, which, you know, it's kind of my preferred version of Road Rash. I mean, I know everybody loves 2, but I don't know, I just like the third one. Any of the Road Rash games are great, so let's just go ahead and include the third one on the Sega Genesis Mini 2. Next is RoboCop vs. Terminator. This game is so good. The graphics are amazing, the sound is great, the gameplay is fun. I like blasting those guys out the windows like that. This is so much better than the Super Nintendo version. Next is Rocket Knight Adventures. Again, one of those games that I just associate with the Sega Genesis. It should have been on the original, but it wasn't. So let's rectify that and have it on the Sega Genesis Mini 2. Next is Saturday Night Slam Masters. I feel like we need a good wrestling game, and to me, this is just the most fun of all of them. Next is Sylphid, which is a shooting game on the Sega CD. All the backgrounds are just full motion video, but it still looks pretty dang cool. Next is Snatcher, which, come on, you gotta have Snatcher on here. It's the only English version of this game.
Whoa!
A time bomb?
Evacuate immediately! There is little time!
Jeez, my ears are really ringing.
That's because you left the volume turned up.
Damn snatchers.
There is no need for concern. I have stored all the information about the evidence and the area in my memory. We should return to Junker headquarters.
Next is Sonic 3, a game that was strangely forgotten on the original Sega Genesis Mini. And of course, if we are going to include some Sega CD games, we gotta include Sonic CD. A lot of people say this is the best Sonic game, and I don't know that I agree with that. It's definitely the most crazy Sonic game. Next is Splatterhouse 2. I remember the TurboGrafx Mini had Splatterhouse 1 on there, so it just makes sense to have Splatterhouse 2 on here, and I think it is actually on the Mega Drive Mini 2. Next is Starblade, which I believe is actually slated to appear on the Mega Drive Mini 2. I've always really liked this game in the arcades, but the Sega CD version, while fun, it's kind of weird with this mishmash of background FMV and polygon graphics that aren't filled. Makes for kind of a strange looking game. Next is a game called Steel Empire, which is a really beautiful shooting game, kind of a steampunk style game. You can play as a biplane or a blimp. I just kind of prefer to play as the blimp, which seems kind of a strange choice to have in a video game. Next is Super Hang-On, which, as a Sega property, it really should have been on the original Sega Genesis Mini, but let's go ahead and include it on the second one. Now this is more of a pure racing game, unlike Road Rash, which is more of a racing fighting game. Gotta be careful of those trees, though. Next is Super Street Fighter 2. We had the original Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition on the Sega Genesis Mini, but let's go ahead and include Super Street Fighter 2. Alright, back to Disney games. Let's go ahead and include Toy Story on there, which had some really incredible graphical effects. Next is going to be Truxton, which is a very popular Sega Genesis shooting game. This blue laser is kind of my favorite because it kind of homes in on the bad guys. Next is Vector Man 2, which I included here because the original Vector Man was on the first Sega Genesis Mini. As I was playing this, I was thinking, this is kind of an odd game because I'm going around shooting snails and cocoons. Virtua Racing is going to be the last game on the list, and it's the only one that included the SVP chip. And a lot of people say the 32X version is better, and it is, but I find that this version is really a lot of fun. Well, there you have it. There's about 45 games that I think should be on the Sega Genesis Mini 2, assuming that it comes out in North America. I appreciate you watching today. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.